Hi, I'm Susan DeSille with ProHorseProductions, and I'm so excited to be at Wild Rose Mustang Advocacy Group today with Kayla Stone and her intern.
Filming horses has been my passion for over 2 decades, filming tens of thousands of horses in mostly competitive disciplines, as I've been a competitive rider myself. Kayla Stone has been tremendously successful taking completely wild horses, gentling them, and competing them. I wanted to carve out some time to learn more from her.
There are so many Mustangs in holding pens. I want to understand how you adopt a Mustang. So I'm so excited to be at the Wild Rose Mustang Advocacy Group here in close to Fort Collins, Colorado. It's in Wellington, and soft spot in my heart, I went to graduate school in industrial organizational psychology, and I started at CSU because I was eventing a horse up through the levels, and I just wanted to finish that season. So I have a special place in my heart for being up north here. So I'm super excited to explain to people through my visit here today how to adopt a Mustang. She is starting a new branch of their nonprofit that if you found a Mustang that you wanted to adopt, you can send it here and she will help you every week as she works with that Mustang every week. What are some of the benefits of adopting Mustangs? Why some of her students have fallen in love with this breed? Why the co-founder of the foundation adopted Mustangs? And it's just really great to be here and just be a sponge of learning more about these wonderful horses.
Hi, my name is Ruth Rose. I'm one of the co-founders of Wild Rose Mustang Advocacy Group. And these are my Mustangs, Gaia and Tawny. What made me want to adopt a Mustang? I think the desire of just being part of the solution and knowing how wonderful these horses are made me want to bring them into my family. No, I had never owned a Mustang prior to these two. I had never owned any horses either. That might sound crazy, but when you fall in love with them, you fall in love with them, right? And that's the way it is. I wish that people understood that Mustangs are, for the most part, just like any other horse, but they have had a different beginning, and you need to respect where they came from so that you can earn their trust. When I brought Gaia home, she had an 8-week-old foal by her side. So it was a little bit of a different situation because she obviously was protective of her little colt, whose name is Little Red. But at the same time, he became very friendly with people within 24 hours of being brought to the barn, and she came around pretty quickly after that. She really enjoyed lots of the alfalfa treats and just kind of getting to know you in her space. She probably got started under saddle about 6 to 8 months after that because we allowed Little Red to wean and then her go through the process more formally. But in terms of getting to know her and trusting her, probably within the first couple of months. And Tawny was even easier, honestly. She was probably a week or so, and the first time that she was started under saddle, Sarah got on her and they trotted around the round pen. It's not always like that. She just happened to be one of the ones that was a little bit easier. And Kayla gives me a hard time because she's like, how did you wind up with 2 horses that are basically can be used in riding lessons? And they both are. They both are used in lessons regularly, which is pretty awesome. At first, so the kind of facility that they are required to start in actually is they have to have a minimum of 6-foot fencing, which is not a standard height of fencing for equines. Obviously, they need a shelter and free food and water, but really the most difficult requirement is, I think, the fencing, because it's not a typical size that is sold or found regularly. They got brought in and immediately, the trailer gets backed up and they get unloaded right into the pen. So there's not any chutes or anything like that they have to go through. I wish I had known more of their story earlier. I have a background in conservation and wildlife management. I haven't done that in a very long time. And I wish perhaps that I had knew about it sooner and maybe done something sooner. Gaia is not very afraid of many things. Tawny's a little bit more spooky. We did an obstacle course last summer, and you know those big tarps that they use for like kindergartners, the big parachutes? And I just draped it over her, and I have a really cute picture of it draped over myself and her, and she just did not bother her whatsoever. Tawny would not tolerate that probably as easily. Tawny was part of the Trainers Challenge in the summer of 2019. And so I picked her up, Kayla picked her up from the Great Escape Mustang Sanctuary because they're a storefront for the BLM and they were organizing the competition that summer. And so that is where she came from. And then, Gaia's from the Forest Service in California. And they get along pretty well with each other, which is kind of nice too, both being mares. Wild Rose was initially started to kind of meet a fundamental need between the gentled horse and the horse that can be successful in a private setting. So most horses, as you probably know, the requirement to be successful is generally having them be under saddle. And there are a lot of people that are really great at doing the early process of gentling and earning trust, but not as many people that can really get them started under saddle while maintaining that trust. And so that was the original intent, was to bridge that gap so that they would have a successful home in the private sector. So many of the Wild Rose horses, there's a wide range of what they've been capable of. Kayla's area of expertise is in eventing, so a lot of the horses have gone on to do eventing. There are trail pleasure horses that have come from us, and I would say those are the two main areas, the equestrian sport, that our Mustangs have found their homes. What do I wish people understood more about them? Is that they really can be very trustworthy companions, and if you take the time to build that trust with them, you guys can do whatever you want, honestly. So Gaia does not have a brand. So the horses from the Bureau of Land Management have this brand that you can see on Tawny, and hers is really easy to see because of her coloring. Some of the other horses, especially if their manes come across, you won't be able to see it as their hair grows in. The U.S. Forest Service managed herds do not get branded. So that is why Gaia does not have a brand, but she is 100% Mustang. So the question is every Mustang brand unique? It is. The U at the beginning is a sign for the Bureau of Land Management, and then they use, I don't remember what the coding system is called, but they use a coding system, and basically it gives you indication of the year that they were born, where they were captured, I hate to use that word captured, but where they were rounded up. So each heritage management area has its own code number, and then so the location and the year, and then her individual number. It is 100% unique to her. So when you talk about a brand inspection, there it is. Although they don't actually look at the brand because it doesn't meet the brand inspection rules, I guess, right? So where do my horses like to be scratched? Her, nowhere. She doesn't like to be groomed, actually. She just doesn't, it's not her thing whatsoever. She'll tolerate it, but it's not her favorite thing. Gaia, on the other hand, will fall asleep. Come here, come here. She really likes her poll scratched, and all along her mane, anywhere. And she's just like, sometimes she'll just come over and bend down because she just wants the attention. So she's a little bit more my heart horse, I would say, because I like to snuggle. Tawny's not a snuggler.
So I have so many questions about adopting Mustangs, and what I discovered looking online, that it wasn't as straightforward and easy as I thought. So I'm so grateful to meet with Kayla and Barb so they can walk us through the process of how do you adopt a Mustang 101? Like, what are some of the different resources and locations and places that you can adopt them? So Kayla, tell me, in Colorado, what are the different times of year and locations that you've adopted Mustangs?
Sure, so it can be different. So usually I recommend we go to the BLM website, and they have either online adoption events or in-person adoption events, and the schedule changes depending on which herds are gathered that year and what herds they have available for adoption. But that is probably the first step, is to check with the BLM, check with the local holding facilities in your area. So we have one here, Canyon City in Colorado, and we have another nearby, Rock Springs in Wyoming.
And about how many horses do they put up adoption each time, or is there no known?
It's not very, it just depends on, again, which herds were adopted, who they have available, so it does vary.
How much does it cost to adopt a Mustang?
Sure, so it's typically $125 to adopt a Mustang, and you do have to be approved through the BLM, and there are usually BLM employees on site at certain adoption events that can walk you through the adoption application process.
And what if I wanted to buy a Mustang? Is that ever an option?
So when you adopt a Mustang through the BLM, you don't receive their title until after a year has gone by. So those horses after a year can be sold, and their title transfers like any other horse. But before that year, technically they're not allowed to be sold. They can be transferred. If we have our nonprofit, sometimes we foster horses, we train them, and then they're adopted by adopters before that year goes up. And then after a year, they have a title, so then they can be sold. If you're looking to buy a gentled horse, a gentled Mustang, then I'd recommend going through nonprofits like Wild Rose or the Great Escape Mustang Sanctuary, and they typically have horses that either have their title or are, finished and riding and ready for adoption.
I've seen you've competed in the Mustang Makeover.
Yes.
And I've seen that they auction those horses out at that event. Does that mean they're still BLM owned and you're only renting them, or?
Yes. So with the Mustang Makeover events, technically the trainers are fostering those horses, and so when at the end of those competitions, they're available for adoption to the public, and those new adopters would then adopt the horse, fill out the adoption application and be approved, and then a year later that adopter receives the title.
Awesome. Now my business has been filming horses for sale, and most of the horses that I market are 30, 40, 50. I've marketed $250,000 horses. On average, I haven't seen Mustangs being sold for nearly as much as what I think they should be sold for. Because in my opinion, riding what I now know to call a domestic horse is a whole different scenario than someone like you who's invested all this incredibly, I'm sorry, but risky time getting this wild horse to a point where it's trusting and calmer and trusting people because they've not been touched, and when they were, it was a pretty rough start of being rounded up. And so I would think some of these horses are a little bit more complicated. And then yes, you've done amazing jobs with your students here and listening to them say, oh, it's just a horse. Well, not every horse starts that way, and not every horse can continue on that path. My heart in being here is also to help you have better exposure that these horses have some really unique properties that are even superior than domestic horses. So walk me through some of the things that you like more about working with Mustangs than maybe some of the domestic horses that we have.
Sure. What I really love about Mustangs is I love their brains. I sometimes call it street smarts. I work with off-the-track thoroughbreds and warm bloods and more domesticated breeds as well. And Mustang in a hairy situation will almost always think it through. Their self-preservation is so much higher than domesticated horses, so that's a pretty awesome thing. I don't have to worry about them as much. You can turn them out in a group, and they know how to keep themselves out of trouble. But on the riding side of that, since I do eventing, my favorite horse to ride cross country is a Mustang. They're smart with their feet. They're looking out just as much as I am where we're going. They're brave. They've been out in the wild. They know the terrain. So those are my two favorite things, as well as they're hardy. I can count on my hands the amount of Mustang injuries I've had, and the amount of thoroughbred, warm blood, domesticated injuries far exceeds that, which is, it's unfortunate, but I mean, that's what domesticity does. So the wild horses do know how to take care of themselves. So that is definitely one of my favorite parts about them.
So street smarts, hardy.
Yes, athleticism, just good with their feet. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you bring in students who come here to ride your Mustangs, many people probably wouldn't even realize that they're riding a horse that used to be just an open range on the wild. You give lessons regularly on these horses.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and usually when we tell the kids that these horses used to be wild, they're shocked, but it's kind of cool because then they, think about what the horse was like in the wild, and they're riding it now, and it's a super lesson horse.
Well, thank you for taking a minute with me, and I'm going to get back behind the camera and fire a whole bunch of questions that I prepared on my phone that I'm looking forward to getting help with. How long should someone let a Mustang settle in before starting to build a partnership with them?
So for me, I start working with that horse right away, and it may not be specific training, or it may just be that I go in there and I'm feeding, I'm cleaning the pen, I'm sitting in there sometimes. It's rare now that I'm not super busy, but if I have some extra time, I might go in there and read or work on emails, or you just kind of sit down and let the horse get used to your presence. So I start right away.
And then what's your next step with a Mustang after you've started with just having them getting used to you being there?
Yes, after they've gotten used to our presence and we are recognized as coming in for good reasons like food and just kind of being around them, then we'll start individually working with that horse. So in our setup here and at Taft Hill Acres in Fort Collins, we have the ability to separate these horses into individual pins out of the herd so that we can work one-on-one with them. And so that would be my next step, is just working on body language, teaching the horse to face up and pay attention to us, and working with a little bit of positive reinforcement as well as traditional pressure and release methods.
Which Mustangs would you say were the greatest challenges for you and why?
I have worked with, yes, over 100 Mustangs now. And some have been adopted through our program, some were privately owned, but it's been a very awesome experience to work with that many horses. And I would say that, you know, out of over 100 horses, I've had maybe 5 or 6 that have been either ungentle or very hard. So there, it is possible to get some horses that just will never want to have that bond with people. They just, you know, either they have too much trauma or their personality is just, they're just unable to cross that bridge to becoming, to trusting people. So it's something to keep in mind, but they are definitely the minority. And I've had a couple horses that have been very difficult to cross that bridge, but they eventually did come around and ended up being fabulous horses. Probably, you know, my personal horse was one that was very difficult, and she's my favorite. And so I've had a few of those, and then a few that just, you know, unfortunately won't cross that bridge ever. And so we look for sanctuary homes for those horses, and they just live out their lives as they would in the wild.
I have a story about a horse that was more difficult and wasn't gentleable, or became a sanctuary horse, I should say.
Yeah, so one of the Sandwash Basin horses that was adopted at the same time as Wanda, who you saw earlier, has just been very difficult. She seems like she wants to connect, and you can touch her face if you have treats, kind of thing, but she just does not want to be domesticated. And so I've just accepted that that's who she is and what she wants, and so she's basically living in a sanctuary situation at my place.
So tell me a little bit about what a sanctuary position looks like. Do you put hay just over the fence and you stay out of the pen, or?
No, she follows the routines of my other horses, so she's right there in there with them, and she accepts my presence and, you know, that kind of thing, but she just doesn't want the relationship with a human.
Have you met people who just weren't suitable to adopt Mustangs, who've come here to ride? And have you seen, because the general theme I've heard is patience. Have you had some students come here who probably weren't good fits to adopt Mustangs and work with Mustangs?
We've definitely, you know, we have had some adopters or some students come here that perhaps weren't the best fit for Mustangs, but one thing I do want to say is that, you know, I am a firm believer in anyone can learn. So as long as you have the right resources, if you're working with a trainer, if you're open to learning, I think that's probably the most important aspect of this is, you know, yes, we've had some people that maybe don't have the patience to do it themselves, but if they're open to learning and they're open to getting help, then it is possible to work with them and help them along the journey.
Because again, seeing what's behind the curtain, I'm not including this, there are different personality types that are drawn to different disciplines in sports.
Yes.
And there are trainers who ask people to go be successful elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so it just crossed my mind, is there a person that maybe shouldn't be suitable to adopt a Mustang?
And, you know, for some that I see that are perhaps not suitable for adopting a Mustang, I can often suggest that they wait and adopt a horse that is more finished. Because typically if we, you know, I have gotten pretty good over the years at matching horses with people, and once they go through training, develop trust, and they've started showing, a lot of these horses are just as awesome as domesticated horses, and that may be a great option for someone who maybe doesn't have the patience to work through, you know, starting a young Mustang or even being with a green Mustang.
So what do you look for in horses that when you go to an adoption event? What are you looking for Mustangs to bring into your program?
When I go to an adoption event, it depends a bit on if I have an adopter already in mind or if I'm just going to bring horses back for our nonprofit. But typically, regardless of who I'm looking for horses that are well built, horses that are sound. I love to see horses that are a little bit more curious. Obviously, we can't always know exactly what personality we're getting just by looking at horses in the pens, but we do try to, you know, work with horses that want to be worked with. You know, you can usually see the ones that are on the back side of the pen and snorting, and, you know, maybe they aren't the ones that really want to be part of this world yet. So we try to stick with the horses that are more curious. But for me, for sure, I like to see them move. I like to make sure that they're moving well and that they're built well and that are going to be suitable for riding discipline.
So Kayla, let's go meet some of your Mustangs that are here on the property. About how many do you have here?
So we have probably 15 or a little over 15 here on the property right now, and most of those right now are fully gentled, showing, owned by families, going super well, and then you know, 5 or 6 of them are just starting.
Well, I'm excited to have you show me around.
So I am standing in front of Wild Rose Mustang Advocacy Group's new Mustang intake area at our new facility in Wellington. So we have these 6-foot panels here that is a BLM requirement for bringing in unhandled Mustangs. We're able to back in a trailer up to this area to unload these horses since they're unhandled. And so they spend their time in this bigger area as a group setting. These horses get along really well in a herd, obviously. And so then we have a smaller area off of it that we can work with the horses individually. So right now in this area we have Sweetwater here. He is one of the Sandwash Basin Mustangs we adopted in February with Medina and Pintado that we saw earlier. And he's about 2 years old. He is just learning about, you know, being with people. He's actually been quite an easy horse to work with. He's been haltered, led, he's actually had a saddle on, he's starting to pick up his feet. He was trailered here recently, so he's moving along quite well in his training. And then over here we've got a smaller bay mare. She's one of our youth trainers Mustangs. So every year we tend to have a youth program with our nonprofit, and this year we've had our youth trainers work in the Meeker Mustang Makeover event. And so this is a Mustang Makeover event a little bit on a smaller scale. It's not necessarily run by the Mustang Heritage Foundation, but the Meeker area has done a great job in putting on this little event in the last few years, and so we've decided to be a part of it. And we have 4 youth trainers this year that are sharing 2 Mustangs. So this little one here, Willow, is being trained by 2 of our youth trainers. And then the chestnut mare in the far back that's a little bit bigger than Willow, that's Juno. She is our other youth Mustang. And the smaller guy is another Wild Rose Mustang that was part of our No Fear Mustang study funded by Temple Grandin that we did last year. So he is one of the few left from that study that we are continuing to work with and hopefully find an adopter for. So this is Sweetwater. He's a 2-year-old Mustang out of Sandwash Basin. Right now, unfortunately, has a little bit of a skin fungus on his face, but we are treating it, and luckily, as I said before, he's been a pretty easy one to work with, so he's been pretty easy to treat, and we're putting medication on him daily and doing antifungal baths. So it is the reality of some of these guys. They might have you know, fungus or something when they come out of the holding facilities. There are so many horses there, but usually we're able to treat them and get them the help they need, and then he will be sparkling and shiny soon. Hi. So again, Sweetwater's been a pretty friendly horse to work with. One of my favorites, actually, when we first brought them in. He's really, really interested in hanging out with people. He loves scratches. As I said, he's got this little fungus thing going on right now, so he's pretty used to us doctoring him up lately. But he's a pretty cool guy. He right now is like a 2, maybe a little over 2, so he's not going to be started under saddle this year. We're just working with him on, you know, gentling, picking up his feet, trailering, leading. We've saddled him, just in getting him more used to being with people and being an all-around horse so that he can be started under saddle next year. When we first start working with them, we're just sitting in here, getting them used to our presence, and we are often using some positive reinforcement, getting them used to taking hay from our hand, treats from our hand. But yes, scratching is also probably one of the biggest rewards. Once we realize some horses love scratches, and once we realize their favorite spots, that can be just as good of a reward as food.
He's been here how long?
Since February. But actually he just moved to this facility about a week ago. He was at Taft-Hill Acres first.
And who's joining us?
And this is Kirby. Unfortunately, and he's the only other one that has this face fungus right now, so he's a little rough looking right now. But again, he's allowing us to doctor him every day, and hopefully he'll be shiny and new again soon. But Kirby is one of the last horses we have left from our study we did last year funded by Temple Grandin, the No Fear Mustang study that Wild Rose did. So we worked with positive reinforcement techniques, bringing these horses around and gentling these horses, primarily positive reinforcement, and then slowly introducing traditional methods, pressure and release. So I got involved with Mustangs when I did the Mustang Makeover event in 2012. I decided to enter on a whim and ended up falling in love with the breed. I had a ton of fun in that event, and so then I continued working with Mustangs, and I also entered the Mustang Makeover in 2015, 2016, and 2017, and it just kind of kept going from there. And 2018 we developed our nonprofit Wild Rose Mustang Advocacy Group along with Ruth, and since then I've just been a serious advocate for these horses and really enjoying each one I work with. I didn't actually have a lot of exposure to Mustangs. I'm from South Carolina, and the East Coast is still a little bit, we don't have as many resources for wild horses there. Obviously they're more of a out west kind of thing, so I didn't really have a dream because I didn't really know about them and didn't really know the issues involving the overpopulation. But once I moved out here to Colorado in 2007, I started to learn more about it, and in 2012 with that first event I just realized that this was something I wanted to be a part of. So this is my personal Mustang mare, Atalanta. I call her Ada. I got her in the 2016 Mustang Makeover event that was held at the Budweiser Event Center here in Loveland. And so she was a very difficult horse to work with, and when I bring in new horses, new Mustangs, I usually classify them in one of two personality types. And there are the ones that are a little bit more afraid of stuff and situations and atmosphere, and there are the horses that are more afraid of people. And Atalanta was definitely one of the horses that is more afraid of people, less trusting, and these horses tend to take a lot longer in the beginning. So they can be a little bit intimidating to the first-time adopter because they're very flighty, they're very worried. These are horses you can't just go up to and touch right away. It took 4 weeks to be able to touch this horse, and that was more of like a barely touch, and then another 2 weeks to be able to touch her on the offside. She was pretty difficult, especially given that at that time I was perhaps not working with as many horses as I am now, and I spent close to 8 hours a day in the pen with this horse, just trying to get her used to my presence and starting to trust me. So I spent a lot of time with her. I bonded with her really well. I had many people tell me she wasn't going to make it to the makeover, but eventually we got going, got riding, made it to the makeover, and made the top 10. And I did not have the money to buy a horse, but I told myself if she went for less than $1,500, I would buy her back because I really wanted to keep her, and she went for $14. So I was really excited to be able to bring her home. She's been my heart horse ever since. She was my 2016 makeover mount, and then in 2018, just 2 years later, she went to the American Eventing Championships with myself at novice level eventing, and we made the top 10 there, and were awarded the Top Adult Pony Rider Award, since technically she is a pony. And so since then, she's been moving up the levels in eventing, and 2019, 2020 showed training level eventing, always in the ribbons. She's never had a cross-country penalty. She's a pretty neat horse. Just with myself, I've worked with tons of other horses in this sport, and she's definitely my favorite horse to be on cross country, even though she's only 14-1. And training level fences can be a little daunting on a smaller horse, but she is pretty fantastic. So I've had a ton of fun over the years working with her, and as I said, she's definitely my heart horse. We've done bridleless, bareback, she's taught lessons, my 8-year-old can ride her, so definitely a horse I'm going to keep for life. And going back to what I talked about before about the different personality types, this personality type can be harder in the beginning, but they do end up making fabulous horses. So if you have the resources and have training or good trainers and professionals to help, these horses can be pretty awesome. On the flip side of that, horses that tend to be more afraid of things, situations, and atmosphere, they tend to be fairly easy right away. So these horses you can touch usually from day one. Sometimes we've even had horses that we've been able to get on and ride on day 3, and so they seem like they're going quite quickly early on, but then they can hit roadblocks further on. They tend to be a little bit more spooky, they can be a little bit more herd bound. So each personality type has their ups and downs, but it is super important to understand what personality type you have and what personality type you want to work with. As I said, these can be a little intimidating in the beginning to a new adopter, and others can be super confidence boosting because you're able to touch those horses right away. But you do have to understand that training is still involved with both, and you need to understand what type of horse you have so that you know what resources that you'll need moving forward. So after all of the work I've done with this horse, she has definitely become my most trustworthy mount. Trustworthy on the ground, trustworthy with my child that's 8 years old. I can put her on her and know that this horse is going to take care of her, bring her home. Anyone can work with this horse, and she's just overall probably the easiest horse to work with that I have. I know, she's just